Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Tuesday, January the 13th, 2026. I am doing my best to honour Chiron. Why am I honouring Chiron? Well, at the moment I have Chiron conjunct my moon. I've also got Mars making a square to my moon. So potentially that's quite a dangerous aspect. So, what do you do when you have these kind of aspects? You work with the planets that are potentially causing the problem. And, of course, one of the planets that might be causing a problem is Chiron. I say planet, it's not a mainstream planet. It's not a traditional planet. I don't believe that it rules anything, but I do think it is of some importance. So by giving Chiron some space in this video and having this title, The Anger of Chiron, after all, there is a Mars square Chiron today, Tuesday, January the 13th, I'm thinking, well, maybe I'm getting myself out of trouble. So that's going to be the theme of this video, this square between Mars and Chiron. I know it's all a bit too much. Yesterday I talked about Sun square Chiron, but, Chiron does get quite a lot of focus at the moment. So I'm going to go with this theme of the anger of Chiron, in this video. And in particular, I want to talk about, what it means for Mars to be square Chiron. So before I look in great detail at this aspect, Mars square Chiron, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching of today, which is Tuesday, January the 13th, 2026. So here is the chart of today, set for noon, New York time. And don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So as far as this chart is concerned, the moon is still in Scorpio. So the moon is in sort of late Scorpio, set for New York. So the moon is going. That does mean that the moon is going to be in Scorpio for most of the day. Wherever we are, and you look at that chart, you can't help noticing that there's just one planet in yellow. That's Pluto, just one planet in air signs, and that's Pluto, generational planet. No planet in fire signs, not yet. So moon in late Scorpio, what is it doing? It's making trines to Saturn and Neptune. It's also making sextiles to the Mars, Sun, Venus conjunction. So, just because the moon is in Scorpio doesn't mean to say that it's unhelpful. I mean, I know that the moon is fallen in Scorpio, but, it is making fortunate aspects, including a sextile with the sun. We always like sextiles between the moon and the sun. They give us an idea of harmony, things coming together. And so, I don't think we need to be too worried about that, though. Moon is opposition Uranus, so that's one thing going on today. Moon in Scorpio, opposition Uranus in Taurus, and that aspect can sometimes be unsettling. It can stir things up and can represent a degree of stubbornness. Uranus is a stubborn planet. It likes to do things its own way and doesn't like to be told. Now the moon does eventually move into Sagittarius. So it moves into Sagittarius at 11:34 p.m. London time. So if you are in the UK, right at the end of the day, just before midnight, the moon changes sign. The moon moves out of Scorpio, and the moon moves into a fire sign. And so we finally get a personal planet in fire. So that does provide a bit of energy. If you're in the United States, then that means around that would be what does that? That's that would be about half past 6 in the evening, something like that. The moon moves into Scorpio. If you're in California, British Columbia, then late afternoon, the moon moves into Sagittarius. Did I say Scorpio? So yeah, so if you're in, let me get this straight, around 6:30 in the evening, if you're in New York, the moon will move into Sagittarius. If you are in California, that would be around 3:30 in the afternoon. That does represent a slight difference if you are certainly in the United States, and if you're in the Americas in general. Late in the day there is that sign change, the moon moving into Sagittarius, but it just might come too late for you to do anything about it, for you to really take advantage of a moon in Sagittarius, for you to experience a change. But tomorrow the moon is going to be in Sagittarius for everyone. And as far as some non-lunar aspects are concerned, Venus is semi-square the North Node. Well, should I say the sesquiquadrate, the South Node. It's making a semi-square sesquiquadrate aspect to a nodal axis. And I would say that you could see that aspect in perhaps two different ways. I mean, one way of looking at it is to say, well, maybe some of the people around you, some of your friends, the people you're in contact with, are not necessarily in accord with where you should be going. I mean, some of them are, some of them are not, and maybe you need to think about who you're spending your time with. That's one way of looking at it. But if you take sort of a midpoint view, using the work of sort of Ebertin or Witter, the German approach to the nodes, you'd see the nodes as just contacts. You'd see the semi-square as just an aspect, a hard, dynamic aspect. And so Venus semi-square node could be seen as just a natural ability to get on with people, to make contacts. And it may actually be quite benign. And the other non-lunar aspect is, of course, Mars square Chiron. And this Mars square Chiron, you've got Mars at 22, 23, 22 Capricorn, Chiron 22, 23 Aries. So that Mars square Chiron is exact. And, we had Sun square Chiron exact yesterday. And so I described it as the anger of Chiron. And I think that there is an angry side to Chiron, as I started to talk about in my video yesterday. And I'll be talking about this in greater detail at the end of the video. And, it may be that just there are things that make us angry. What might make us angry? Well, for example, injustice, something that is being done wrong, people treated badly. It doesn't matter where they are. It hurts us all. And so Chiron is just not a planet which is about the status quo. I mean, it's just accepting things as they are. This is the way it's done, so I'm going to get angry about it. That's not how it works. And maybe Chiron is prepared to sort of go out on a limb, and maybe even Chiron is prepared to make a sacrifice, maybe even sacrifice itself because of some injustice. And so that might be how we might see Mars square Chiron on a sort of a grand, sort of universal level. But it may also be about how we are leading our individual lives, and we may find that things make us angry. And I'll be talking about Mars square Chiron, over the course of the rest of the video, and certainly at the end of the video, I'll be going into it in detail. So that's the broad picture for today, set for New York. If we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, then the moon is still in Scorpio in the middle of the day. Moon is making sextiles to Sun, Venus, Mars. So I think in many respects it could be quite a constructive day if you're in Australia or New Zealand. Not necessarily a dramatic day, but I do think that you can get things done. And if you are in Australia or New Zealand, of course, the moon will absolutely not be going into Scorpio today. It will go into Scorpio tomorrow. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the centre of the solar system. And, it's kind of more of the same, perhaps not quite as strong as it was. Remember, I was talking about these heliocentric aspects and the fact that Earth was opposition Mars, Earth was conjunct Jupiter. That's what we had a few days ago. It's starting to separate. I mean, the Earth is still conjunct Jupiter. The Earth is still opposition Mars. I mean, that just tells us what we know already from the geocentric picture. The sun is opposition Jupiter, the sun is conjunct Mars, so the heliocentric chart just puts that in a different light. But I think that those aspects are still with us, and there's still a great deal of tension, and it just might feel that at any time things can blow. But the power of that Earth conjunct Jupiter, Earth opposition Mars, is starting to wane, ever so slightly. And the Earth is also moving towards a square of Chiron. So we had a Sun square Chiron geocentrically yesterday, Monday. Now we've got heliocentrically Earth square Chiron coming up. Well, it's over the next day or two, and as I've tried to explain, that Chiron in many respects is a rebellious spirit, and so we've got Chiron as part of a wider sort of T-square structure. We've got Earth opposition Mars, and sort of Chiron is involved here. So Earth and Mars are moving towards Chiron, and so you could argue that Chiron is part of a T-square. I mean, you see this geocentrically as well. So this is not necessarily anything we don't know already, but the heliocentric chart perhaps puts it in a different light. So if you look at, say, Earth opposition Mars, this is about the call to do something. Perhaps if we're angry, we want to do something, we have to do something. At least some of us might feel that. The question is, what do we do? And Chiron might be providing the answer. And with Chiron, you're thinking about being oneself and not being afraid of criticism. And maybe that's all it is. I mean, some people are absolutely stuck, wherever you are in the world, and the reason they're stuck is because they are afraid of raising their voices. They don't want to criticize people in authority. You see it all around you. I mean, for example, where I am in sort of a city in Washington State, people complain a lot. People do complain about what's happening in the city. They can perhaps see that the city is disintegrating. As far as I can see, I'm living in a city which its heyday was decades ago, was probably 100 years ago and more, but its decline is just being accelerated, in my opinion, because of the city bureaucracy. But you see, other people can see this, but they don't raise a voice. They don't draw attention to themselves because they're afraid. They are very afraid about what might happen. They think that if they complain to the city about something, maybe if they then ask permission to build an extension, the city might deny them. Of course, that's not true. But there is that fear, and that fear sees many different forms. But it's the answer, really, to get through that fear. Once you get over that fear, you can be a rebel. And as I said yesterday in my video for Monday, there is something rebellious about Chiron, and having that rebellion can just make things easier. It removes the pressure, even if nothing happens. That is very often the case. That's that's a heliocentric picture, and now I want to move on to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Tuesday, January the 13th, 2026. Aries. Mars is square Chiron. It's exactly square Chiron. Yeah, Mars in Capricorn, square Chiron in Aries. So this aspect is something that, in a way, you should be very familiar with. You know, as an Aries, you like to do things your own way. You are an independent thinker, and most importantly, you are an independent actor. You know, you are the initiator. At least you are if you're a typical Aries. You know, maybe even a stereotypical Aries. But yeah, there's nothing wrong with being the initiator. You know, Aries is the first sign of the 12, and so you see very often when people describe Aries and they try to create some scheme. For example, in astrology books, I know people don't read astrology books anymore, or they very often don't read astrology books anymore, but it was often said that if you want to understand Aries, you see it as something very youthful. It's the beginning of the cycle. And so you just act, and it's the way it is. But what about the square with Chiron? Well, Mars is in Capricorn at the moment. And so you could say that while Mars is in Capricorn, it is somewhat moderated in this sign. It's moderated in the sense that Capricorn is an earth sign, and there is a temptation to do things in a way that is sort of quite methodical and practical, and you stick to accepted paths, at least for the moment, while Mars is moving through Capricorn. But then Mars makes this square to Chiron. And so Mars square Chiron is about appreciating that you can make a difference. I hate using that word, make a difference, by the way. It's overused. But I mean that seriously. You can make a difference. And that's not just make a difference. It is awful. I think the police cars around here used to have "make a difference" written on them. I think they still have them. Or maybe have they changed it? I'm not sure. I don't see it so much. There used to be a phase of the local police having "make a difference" written on their cars. So I'm a bit careful with that phrase. But you can have an impact, and you can have a real impact. And in order to have an impact, you of course have to be an individual. You can't just follow what everyone else is doing. If you think about what other people are saying, what other people are thinking, you're not going to get anywhere, because maybe other people are playing safe. So there is a real challenge here. And don't forget that Chiron is moving through Aries. So with Chiron moving through Aries, that should be stirring you up. Chiron, as I increasingly say, is a rebel. It's a rebellious energy. It's a maverick. I mean, that the man who discovered Chiron, Charles Carl, described Chiron as a maverick. Although he was seeing it not in a psychological sense or a trait sense, he was looking at its orbit, but it had a very eccentric orbit. Hence Chiron is a maverick influence, and so it's okay to stand out. Of course, you've got to consider your own culture. I know people are watching this from all sorts of places, and there are cultural variations about what it means to stand out. But in terms of cultural, whatever your cultural norms are, you do need to make more of an effort to be different. But not different just for the sake of it, because you have something to offer, you have something to say. And at the same time, Aries, there are things that you are passionate about. The moon is in Scorpio, and there are things that you take very seriously, and now you're taking them really seriously. and you do, I believe, have a great sense of justice and injustice, and that can be an Aries trait. So I think in many respects, this Mars square Chiron is just intensifying, what it means to be an Aries, anyway. And so, don't be afraid, don't be worried about asserting yourself. And you certainly don't have to do anything stupid even, because, the moon is making a sextile to Mars. And so, with the moon making a sextile Mars, that means, Aries, that you can just act in a way that is, very natural. It is spontaneous. It has a certain amount of caution. You can be cautious and you can be a rebel. There's no point in exposing yourself to overwhelming attack. You have to work with the material in front of you, but you can also use your feelings to understand what you can get away with. And so, Aries, it's not like you have to draw huge amounts of attention to yourself. You just need to act in a way that is appropriate, and it's certainly not a time for just fitting in. I don't think you could stand to fit in. So that goes back to Mars square Chiron. I do think it's a powerful aspect. And okay, I could be very negative about it and say, you could go on about Mars square Chiron, the wounded healer, all of that kind of the passive nature of that, and there might be some wound connected with Mars square Chiron, but I don't think one needs to go down that road at all. I think the real wound might be doing nothing, feeling you can't speak, feeling you're trapped. And as I'm trying to say with this, there is an element of choice. If you want to be yourself, if you want to be open about your feelings and perhaps open about your anger, without doing anything stupid, without doing anything crazy, you can be, and I think you're going to feel a whole lot better. It's better doing that than sort of brooding about some imagined wounds. They may be real, they may not be real. So, be as forthright as is possible. Taurus. There is quite a lot going on today. We've got the moon still in Scorpio, moving through sort of late Scorpio. And so when you're talking about moon in Scorpio, inevitably you're talking about potentially other people, the people in your life. After all, the moon is in your opposite sign. And so with Scorpio as your opposite sign, that means you do have to pay some attention to other people. But that doesn't mean to say that's a bad thing. The moon in Scorpio is making fortunate aspects to all the Capricorn planets. For example, it's making a sextile to Mars, sextile to the Sun, and it's making a sextile to Venus. And of course, Venus is your ruler. So, moon sextile Venus could be seen as an aspect that allows you to get yourself together and to make the most of what you have, but through other people very often. And it might be that, if you're trying to move up, elevate yourself, elevate your awareness, it could well be that other people have their role to play. You shouldn't feel that you are on your own. And so do listen to what people are saying. And you might think you've got all the answers, but that is not necessarily the case. And maybe at times, Taurus, it would be a good idea if you were to be challenged. After all, one of the aspects we've got today is an opposition between the moon and Uranus. So we've got the moon in Scorpio, opposition Uranus in Taurus. Of course, Uranus is in your sign. So with Uranus in Taurus, that might encourage you to double down. these things are important to you. These are things that you have really got to focus on, and you don't want to compromise. But then Moon is opposition Uranus, and so that does suggest that you really should listen, and be aware that other people have a different view, and you might well be able to benefit from that different view, because the moon is making a sextile to Venus. So don't feel that you have got all the answers, and also don't be surprised if you see something that you hadn't really accounted for, or you might even see another side to a person's personality. You might see their intensity. We have got, after all, a square between Mars and Chiron. It's a Mars square Chiron day, and Mars is obviously a high energy planet, but when it's square Chiron, it is challenged to do things differently, and to sort of test people's boundaries, people's borders, because it has to, because sometimes there's just a general air of complacency. And Taurus, it is possible that you are part of this air of complacency, and you need someone else to just remind you that things should be looked at, in a different way. So I'm really thinking that you do need to think about this, and you shouldn't think, Taurus, that you've got all the answers, and that may be another reason why you do need to pay attention to what other people are doing, what other people are saying. And Venus, by the way, is making a square to the nodal axis. So the north node is at, sorry, did I say square? I meant semi-square. North node is at about 10 degrees 11 Pisces. Venus is at 25 Capricorn. So Venus is 45 degrees from the north node. And this might say something about what you should be doing, what you need to be doing at this particular moment in time. And the node is about the way forward. And with Venus semi-square the north node, perhaps you are being challenged to have a look at what other people are offering. What is going on, and also to be looking at society, and perhaps what is wrong with society. And maybe you need to accept that you can play a role. And you might not think you can play a role, but this Venus semi-square node is saying, yes, you can. And in the process, you need to be thinking, not just about what you can do, your own creativity, what you like doing, what you enjoy doing, maybe your own pleasure and leisure, thinking about all of that. You need to go beyond that and to be thinking about, what actually is your contribution. And you might say, oh, well, how do you do it? How can you do it? It's not possible. Well, it is possible. And you have the opportunity to have an influence which, goes beyond your immediate sphere. But you have to see what's available. You have to talk to people. You have to find people who are like-minded and be prepared to sort of move things to the next stage, and not be complacent to just assume that someone else is going to do it. No, you've got to allow yourself to be challenged. Gemini, you could find yourself putting your energy into strange and unusual places. You have energy, of course. We all have energy, but what are you actually doing with it? And what actually motivates that energy? Why do you feel you need to completely focus on one thing rather than another thing? And Geminis at the moment, may be tempted to focus on things which are not just unusual, but things which might also be somewhat unsavory, at least unsavory to some people. So do think about your interests. What is interesting to you right now, and it might be good that you can be interested in things which no one else is wanting to touch with a barge pole. So perhaps you can go into areas which are difficult, which might be dangerous, but at least you're showing an interest. I mean, we perhaps do need to be interested in things which are going on under the surface. We can't just sweep everything under the carpet. So in that sense, Gemini, I think that this is pretty positive, and it allows you to really make the effort into really understanding something. Now, this might have a very sort of practical dimension. I mean, the moon is in Scorpio, and it just could be that there is just something you want to attend to, which in a way might be just disgusting. By that I mean maybe something needs to be cleaned, and it might need to be cleaned, and it's just not something you want to do, something that just involves, I don't know, filth or accumulated dirt. I mean, I'm talking about things in a really very physical way. Just accumulated dirt, mess. You don't want to touch it, but the longer you leave it, it just builds up. And so now might actually be a good time for addressing that issue. It might be connected with garbage. An accumulated garbage, things that are rotten. It could be something as apparently trivial, as cleaning out a fridge. Things might have been there for, a couple of months, and they might have turned green. But maybe it's just time to clear them out. But there may be other things in life which are kind of like that. Maybe there are things in your life, maybe things in your social life that have turned a bit green and need to be removed. So that would be a way of being constructive about it, and you've got to do it sometime, so why not do it now? And this might also feed into the fact that Mars is square Chiron. Mars is in Capricorn, and Mars is in a part of your chart which is it is quite intense, and you are in general prepared to sort of dig deep into things with Mars in Capricorn. And maybe with Mars square Chiron, you're asking yourself a lot of questions about the world in which you're living, and the people you have you come across. It's a time, Gemini, where you don't want to just look at things in a surface way, and you are prepared to go further and to ask questions and to consider things which might seem absurd. They might even seem worrying, but you're still prepared to ask those questions. And it's not necessarily easy, but I think it's certainly enlightening. Now, the moon is in late Scorpio, and moon in Scorpio can be hard work if you're a Gemini. And so while the moon has been in Scorpio over the last couple of days, there might just have been things that you wanted to do that had to be done, and it might not have been particularly interesting, but that you were able to apply yourself, as I've been suggesting, that you're able to deal with things right now which may be somewhat disgusting if need be. But the moon is going to change sign. If you are in the Americas, then sort of late afternoon, this evening, the moon moves out of Scorpio and into Sagittarius, and that does create a real change. The moon moving into Sagittarius, a positive sign, also a fire sign, and additionally Sagittarius is of course your opposite sign. Sagittarius is opposition Gemini, and so with the moon moving into Sagittarius, there is a change there, and perhaps you can start to see people in a different way. You're seeing them in one way, not always a very flattering way, and now you can start to see them in a different way, and that might be just something that you appreciate, the moon moving into Sagittarius. I think you will appreciate the moon moving into Sagittarius, but I'll be talking about moon in Sagittarius when I do your horoscopes for tomorrow for Wednesday. Cancer. You're, to an extent, enjoying the moon in Scorpio. I talked about moon in Scorpio yesterday, and I think I was pretty positive about the moon in Scorpio. In a way, the moon is even more positive in Scorpio today. I mean, the moon is, it's out of the Via Combustor, so because the moon is in late Scorpio, and so you get sort of all the benefits of a moon in Scorpio, without the downside. And at the moment we've got the moon in Scorpio making sextiles to all the Capricorn planets. So we've got moon making sextile to Mars, sextile to Venus, and sextile to the Sun, and we've also got moon making a trine to Saturn. So it's kind of all happening, and those sextiles are pretty benign. They allow you, I think, Cancer, to relate very well to other people. There's just a natural facility there. You don't have to try too hard, and there are things that you enjoy. There are things that we all enjoy, and through interaction with other people, you can, in fact, have fun. And indeed, one of the first aspect of the day is, depending on what sort of time zone you look at, is moon trine Jupiter. So the day starts with moon trine Jupiter, that very sort of fortunate influence of the moon opposite moon trine Jupiter, and then things just get better and better. Up to a point. I'm not saying that things are 100% wonderful, but while you've got those sextiles, you can benefit greatly from another person, and it may be a situation where you don't have to be completely in the center of things. There will be times when you can let other people take the initiative. You can listen to their ideas. If they have suggestions, I think you can go with them up to a certain point. I think in most cases, people are going to be fairly sensible. And the moon does make a trine to Saturn. So, moon trine Saturn, is an aspect which it happens quite often. It's not an unusual aspect. It happens twice a month. But we have moon trine Saturn. It is a time when you can really get on with one other person and really be able to gain a lot from them. And it might be a situation where you're dealing with a person who is perhaps wiser than you, more sensible than you. Perhaps in certain areas they're more experienced than you, and they've just got they've got some wisdom to offer you. So you don't have to feel that you've got to work it all out for yourself. If something doesn't make sense, there's no harm in just asking, and I think you'll get some really good answers. Now, the main aspect today, at least the headline aspect, the aspect I want to talk about is Mars square Chiron. Now, I kind of talked about it yesterday, but I was kind of focusing on Sun square Chiron. Now it's Mars square Chiron, and this Mars square Chiron might be a challenge. It is in cardinal signs, and you could say that it's kind of involved with a T-square, because Mars is opposition Jupiter. It's also conjunct the Sun, and so this T-square rolls on, and the Mars square Chiron in a way is perhaps the peak of the T-square, maybe. But so, what is this T-square? It's about a resolution. The question is, what do you do? You have a vision. I mean, I hope you have a vision. Jupiter is moving through your sign. I don't know how you've experienced Jupiter moving through your sign, but it's still very much in your sign, and it's, as far as I'm concerned, a very optimistic energy that is allowing you to think about lots of different things, lots of different possibilities. But to an extent, these Capricorn planets have been a challenge, because you perhaps have to weigh up, your priorities and other people's priorities. And I know at the moment you get on relatively well with other people, but still you've got a clash here. And you've got you've got Chiron on the T, Chiron in Aries on the T. And it could be that a resolution to this tension is for you to take the initiative. That might be the way to deal with it. You might have an argument or a disagreement, and you're seeing it as a question of balance, and compromise even. But then Chiron is saying, well, it goes beyond compromise. It goes to the stage of you bringing everything together and saying, well, actually, we've got to do this. And that might be the real message of Chiron in Aries for you, Cancer. You being quite decisive, and perhaps deciding on a course of action which may not be expected. It may even be quite rebellious. It might, on the surface, seem high risk, but you're doing something different. You're not doing something different just for the sake of it. That's absolutely not what it's about. It's about understanding where your particular rebellion is. But it's not. But again, it's not just about rebellion. Rebellion gives us the idea of destroying something without putting anything in its place. But this Chiron goes beyond that. It's about saying, well, this is what matters, and this is what needs to be addressed, and we need to think about it differently. I mean, not everyone will agree, but you have the ability to be quite unique in terms of plotting a path for yourself, and maybe plotting a path for other people. But if you do plot a path for yourself, it may be the case that not everyone wants to follow it, and that's okay. So you shouldn't assume that everyone is going to agree with you. But if you feel that something has to be done, that you have to go in a particular direction, then I think in most cases you should probably follow your heart. Leo. It's kind of a bit like yesterday. I don't think there is a huge amount of difference between today, Tuesday, and yesterday. I mean, everything is in the same signs. I mean, the moon is still in Scorpio for most of the day. Okay, at the end of the day, if you're in the Americas, the moon does move into Sagittarius, but for most of us, it's the moon in Scorpio that matters. And the moon in Scorpio does make a sextile to your sun, and so this moon sun sextile allows you to get yourself together, but not necessarily in a way that is especially dramatic. You shouldn't be looking for drama. I mean, other people can have their dramas, but as far as you're concerned, it's perhaps just about creating some order while you can, while you are still in control. Because don't forget, all of these Capricorn planets are going to go into Aquarius quite soon, and when they go into Aquarius, when they go into your opposite sign, that might mean that you do have to pay more attention to what other people are doing, and you may not have quite so much freedom. Right now you do have freedom, provided you have a disciplined approach. You've got to do things properly to an extent. You've got to do things, by the book. But if you can do that, and you're not looking for the spectacular results, I think that today can be just pretty solid. Though I should point out that the moon is making an opposition to Uranus. So that moon opposition Uranus is a potential moment of stress, and perhaps part of the problem with this moon opposition Uranus, is that the moon is in Scorpio, and so with the moon in Scorpio, you might be inclined to sort of do things your way. You have an idea about the way things should be done, and you want to do it in a way that is, maybe quite sort of secretive, or you don't, or if not secretive, then you certainly value your own space. You don't want to take risks. You don't want to do anything crazy. But moon opposition Uranus, there may be times during a day, or maybe one moment during a day, when something happens from the outside which is difficult to understand and is also difficult to ignore. So there might be a moment of pressure coming from the outside world. It could be a phone call, it could be email, something that bothers you. I'm not saying it's going to bother you in a totally serious way. It's kind of upsets the calm, and your first impulse might be to ignore it. But if something does turn up, then I think it is important that you do pay attention to it, because if you don't pay attention to it, well then it might fester. Now might be a chance to nip something in the bud, and so be aware of that. So if a problem does occur over the course of the day, then you act quickly. And if you act quickly, you should be able to to sort it out. But you don't have to spend all your time worrying about things, worrying about what other people are doing, and there is going to be space to let go. Maybe there are things that you need to let go of. You do your best to make sure that everything's running properly, and once you're confident about that, there may be an opportunity to just switch off, because part of you, Leo, just feels that you want to be part of something else. You don't want to be totally obsessed with agendas and making sure everything's done properly. You just want to become part of a wider whole. And so from a spiritual perspective, that might mean that it's a day when you want to sort of move beyond your individuality, and you don't want to take anything too seriously. I know that I've just said that there may be things you have to take seriously. They just suddenly appear from nowhere. They need your attention. But broadly speaking, Leo, if you're honest with yourself, you don't want to take anything seriously. It's just a pain. It just creates stress. And if you can just let go and just say, well, this is the way the universe is going, let's just go with it for the moment, that might be the right approach. This is not a long-term thing. It's just how you might feel today. Virgo, you're able to deal with with lots of different things. You are quite flexible at the moment, and you have the capacity to deal with things which other people might not be interested in. Perhaps people are looking the other way. That's often the case, isn't it? You notice things, you regard them as being of incredible importance, and they're not going to go away. Certain other people may be of the view that if they just close their eyes, the problem in front of them will just disappear. And that's not right. Not even not right. That's just simply plain fantasy. And so, Virgo, it could be a day when you tell yourself what is important. You remind yourself of what is important, and you're prepared to get your hands dirty, and that's something that Virgos can do. They're quite good at that. They don't shy away from the material, the material side of things, and they can get involved. And if other people are disgusted, well, so what? It's just the earth. It's very real. You get your hands dirty. I mean, is that a big deal? In the end, all of us are going to return to the earth, aren't we? In one way or another. So Virgo might just be able to just take everything in its stride, and in the process, perhaps even Virgo can enjoy itself. You can enjoy yourself. I mean, the moon is in Scorpio. The moon in Scorpio does facilitate that rather gritty approach. This is the way it is. Let's not shy away from things that on the surface seem unpleasant. And then the moon is making sextiles to the Capricorn planets, making sextiles to Venus, to Sun, to Mars. So those sextiles, they allow you to take great pleasure in what you're doing. It's not crazy pleasure. It's just pleasure that is very grounded, is very earthy, and so you do what feels right, and you just get on with it, and you follow things according to your own routines, and you just do it, and it just feels very satisfactory. So in fact, Virgo, it may not be such a bad day. And I mean, I know that we have Mars square Chiron, which is, of course, as far as I'm concerned, the main aspect of the day. But I don't think this Mars square Chiron is such a problem. I think it intensifies what I've just been saying. So you've got Mars is in Capricorn, square Chiron in Aries, and because of this, you are able to do things which are different, which appear to be different. As far as you're concerned, they're just completely normal, and you do it all, without much complaining. That's Chiron. I mean, Chiron for you, Virgo, is really telling you that you can't just look at things on the surface. That there are things going on deep down. They might be painful, but then with Mars square Chiron, you can integrate all of this. So you're getting involved in everything, including stuff which is quite emotional, and perhaps we're talking about deep wounds. Wounded healer, Chiron, we might be, but you're able to get involved with all of this, and it feels right. There may be sort of a moment of challenge, but then you get involved in something, and it's intense, but you're completely familiar with it, and yes, there is a feeling of creative satisfaction, that you're doing something that is fundamentally worthwhile. So it's that kind of day. It's a day when you really are being a Virgo, but you're being a Virgo in a way that is very real. You're not just focusing on the details. That's sometimes said about Virgo. You're able to really go deeply into things, and you're really able to go deeply into all those details. But in the process, you are able to enjoy yourself. You're able to have a great sense of satisfaction, just knowing that you are doing the right thing. Libra. Venus is making a semi-square to the North Node. So with this semi-square to the North Node, there may be a question about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and whether or not you're ignoring something. So the logic behind that is clear. I mean, the North Node in Pisces is where you're supposed to be going to. I mean, that's one way of looking at the nodes. It's your path forward. But if Venus is semi-square the node, you could argue that something is in the way, that there's something perhaps that you don't want to do. It just feels like too much effort. And, at the moment, we've got all these planets in Capricorn, and, with all these planets in Capricorn, it's possible that there are things you'd like to do in a particular way, and part of you doesn't really want to be bothered because it seems too much effort, and it might upset your peace of mind. That might be how you see it. I mean, that's quite a Libran thing. I mean, Libra does like the balanced mind. We don't want anything to upset that balance. We don't want anything to create unnecessary confusion. But then Venus semi-squares a node. You're confronted with something. And so what are you confronted with? Well, I think that you might be just confronted with an obligation to make sure that something is properly sorted out, is in order. It may be something that is starting to spiral into chaos. It's not there yet. But if you don't do something about it now, it could become a problem very soon. And so it would be, it'd be easier to just do nothing, to be happy in your world. But Venus semi-square, the North Node, is saying, well, you can't actually do that. You would not be advised to do that because there's something that needs to be sorted out, like, right now. Okay, if you don't sort it out, it's not like a complete disaster, but I think it would be in everyone's best interests. So I think that, that Venus semi-square the node, is an aspect that really shouldn't be ignored. And as I was saying yesterday, with the moon in Scorpio, one thing that you need to be perhaps aware of is the financial side of things with the moon in Scorpio. And the moon is making sextiles to Venus, to Mars, the Sun, and it's making a sextile to Venus. And so it might be with those sextiles that you have an opportunity to get things together. Something that had not been sorted out, had been sort of left hanging in the air, and it might have been a sort of a difficult situation financially and socially as well, because you didn't want to bring it up, you didn't want to make a fuss. But maybe you should be ready to make a fuss. It's a strain. Of course, it's a strain. Venus, particularly when you've got Venus semi-square the node, because the node can also represent other people. It can represent your contacts. Yeah, there is a bit of a strain, but if you go through with it, and if you address something the moment it comes to mind, it is going to make things, I think, so much easier for you. And then there is Mars square Chiron. I mean, I have to talk about Mars square Chiron. I've been telling everyone about Mars square Chiron, and Mars is in Capricorn. It's in an angular part of your chart, and so if it's square Chiron, that might say something about another person's anger. And if you come across anger and irritation in another person, you should ask yourself, what is it actually about? Is it someone just getting annoyed for the sake of it, or is a deeper set of principles at work? And don't be surprised by other people and their principles. It can be a surprise, particularly if you're an air sign. you think that everything is negotiable, and you suddenly find it's not negotiable, because sometimes people just will not do something because it's so important. You've got to hold on to it so firmly. And so with Mars square Chiron, don't underestimate other people's power and other people's intensity, and don't make assumptions about their motivations. You might think that they're prepared to discuss things, that they're prepared to compromise, but not necessarily. Some people are really holding firm, and they are holding firm for a good reason. Scorpio, Mars square Chiron. I mean, that's the theme of this video, and of course, Mars is your ruler. So with Mars square Chiron, you would naturally expect this aspect to have quite a big impact on you, and so the question is, what is it about? And I think part of what it is about, as I think I was saying yesterday, is that you have to think about what is the nature of power and control. What is it? And with Chiron in Aries, for you, Scorpio, that is a lot to do with the way your life is fundamentally structured. You have particular structures in which you've been leading your life, and those structures have worked up to a point. But you also kind of know that maybe they're not good enough. And part of Mars square Chiron is about thinking outside the box. And you might have been completely happy with something for ages, for years, and it hasn't bothered you. You just continued doing it. But suddenly with Mars square Chiron, you're looking at it again. Now, why would now be different? Okay, Mars square Chiron, by the way, is an aspect that happens fairly regularly. It's not like a once-in-a-lifetime aspect. And we're talking about Mars. I mean, Mars moves pretty quickly. I mean, it moves through, all the signs on average, every 2 years. Why now? Well, maybe why now is because of Jupiter, perhaps. Mars is opposition Jupiter. Jupiter's in Cancer. And Chiron is making a T-square, so it's rather unusual, this Mars square Chiron. It's more powerful than your average Mars square Chiron, and so with this Mars square Chiron, you may just look at things that you've been doing for ages, and you look at it again, and you're thinking, no, this is perhaps limiting. And I do think that the Mars square Chiron that you're experiencing is feeding into Jupiter in Cancer, because Jupiter moved into Cancer last year, and hopefully while Jupiter has been in Cancer, Scorpio, you've been thinking about things in a different way. You've been able to sort of elevate your perceptions, and you've been able to sort of just move beyond sort of the everyday trivia and see the wider picture. And now that Mars is square Chiron, you're thinking, well, things have to change. That you're not going to live forever. Of course, obviously, none of us are going to live forever. But do you want to carry on, perhaps for the rest of your life, doing the same old things in the same old way? And perhaps Mars square Chiron is saying, well, no, you don't. And you've perhaps been looking at the wrong things in the past, or perhaps you've been trivializing things, and now everything becomes important. So this might be, the best way of dealing with this Mars square Chiron, just accepting that old ways of doing things have really passed their sell-by date. And, and in the process, you're likely to feel a great sense of your own power and your creativity. I think you really can. You're really aware of what you could do if you had the opportunity. Your fundamental abilities seem close to the surface. If you just were given the chance, the sky would be the limit. And so what is preventing you from doing everything you want to do? I mean, maybe nothing is preventing you. Maybe everything is fine. But if you do feel that something is preventing you, Scorpio, then just small changes to your daily routine could just make a huge difference. And part of that maybe is linked to other people's expectations of you. You've perhaps been straitjacketed by these expectations. These expectations, okay, may come from other people who are in the here and now. These expectations could have come from a distant past, but you have, to an extent, limited your horizons. And I think that's also something you've been aware of since the summer, since Jupiter went into Cancer. And I think that this Mars square Chiron is kind of the key. Because you think I do think Chiron is the key, because Mars is opposition Jupiter. You are being challenged to move things on, and you haven't quite known how to do it. You felt stuck, and now Chiron is kind of showing you how to make progress. It's showing you what you need to do, and I think what you need to do is work on a very basic level. You change some of those commitments. You committed yourself to be doing the same thing every day, and you decide, or you've given too much time to other people, other things, and now you want to make a change. And Chiron is kind of showing you the way forward. So, overall, Scorpio, I think all of this does look pretty positive, because you now have the tools for actually realizing the potential of Jupiter being in Cancer, of all the the possibilities for inspiration and spiritual growth that Jupiter in Cancer represents. Sagittarius, well, the moon is getting ready to move into your sign. In fact, if you're in the Americas, late afternoon, this evening, early this evening, the moon will move into Sagittarius. And the moon moving into Sagittarius is something that I think that you will regard as being, quite a welcome development. Moon in Scorpio, it's perhaps been a bit overwhelming. You've had to think about things in your own way, and you haven't always been able to express yourself while the moon has been in Scorpio. Although today the moon is making sextiles to Mars, Sun and Venus, so you could argue that those sextiles kind of have an impact on your sign, because you could say that from a midpoint perspective, if we take sign midpoints, you've got Scorpio, you've got Sagittarius, and then you've got Capricorn. So you've got a lot of activity in Capricorn. You've got the moon in Scorpio. So when the moon makes a sextiles to Venus, Sun, and Mars, you're in the middle. You can feel that power, and you can feel that something is going on that perhaps you can benefit from. And to make the most of the moon in Scorpio, I think that it's important that you do things in a way that is quite quiet. I don't think that there's any reason to make a huge amount of noise. That's not important. You don't need to draw attention to yourself, and again, that really is key. So it might be a disappointing day if you're a super extrovert and if you feel that you have to be in the center of things. On the other hand, if you're prepared to do things behind the scenes, I don't think things needn't be so bad. And additionally, Jupiter, I think, like yesterday, Jupiter is still on the Mercury-Venus midpoint, because remember, Jupiter's in Cancer. It's opposition Mercury, it's kind of opposition Venus, and it's halfway between the opposition of Mercury and the opposition of Venus. So Jupiter on the Mercury-Venus midpoint does really boost boost your talents and your artistic ability, and you can fundamentally be confident that you've got the skills that are needed, and you don't have to show off about them, because if you're confident, of course you don't have to show off about them. You only have to talk about your skills and what you can do if you're kind of nervous about it, if you feel, well, maybe you're not quite good enough, so I've got to talk about it. So that is something that I would regard as being pretty positive, and also Sagittarius, I think you can be fairly down to earth at the moment. I mean, I think we can all be down to earth, perhaps, with all those planets in Capricorn, and you're very aware of limits, what can be done, what can't be done, given available resources. But maybe you might be too aware, and let's not forget that Chiron is making a square to Mars in Capricorn. That's, of course, the main theme of this video. And so, as far as what this means, it might occur to you that in order to really make something happen, to really use your talents to their maximum, that you're going to have to get something together in a creative sense. And so it's not enough just to be working away to sort out a material problem. Perhaps it's a money issue. Perhaps you're working towards raising a particular sum of money, and you focus a lot on the money. But the money alone is not what it's all about. It's about doing something which is fundamental to who you are and what you are. And so there might be a mismatch there, or an apparent mismatch. Particularly if you're working, you might be thinking that this is not connected with who you are. And if there is a wound, and I think we do have to sometimes talk about the wounded healer with Chiron. I don't know about the healer, but if there is a wound, it could be just a sense of dissatisfaction, that you're working towards something you want. You want to be someone else, or you want to, not someone else, but you want to really be able to express who you are, but the things you have to do on a day-to-day basis may appear to be unsatisfying, may appear to be alienating. And so Mars square Chiron is asking you to resolve this issue. And it's saying, well, there is a way in which you can do something that is fundamental to your future, and you can do it in such a way that it feels satisfactory. And you should not forget that it's not just Mars square Chiron, it's Jupiter as well, because Jupiter is making a T-square, because we've got Jupiter opposition Mars. And so with Jupiter opposition Mars, it could be alienation. Part of you regards the material world as being alienating, particularly if you have to work in that material world, do things that you regard as being fundamentally useless. But you still have to do them, because if you don't do them, you can't actually realize who you are. You can't realize your potential. And so the question is, how do you deal with that struggle? And maybe the struggle, the resolution to the struggle is Chiron itself. And Chiron is perhaps asking you to be an individual, make it clear what you want to do, how you want to do it. And it just could be that if you're sincere, you can create a situation where you are looking after your material interests, but you're also not compromising your creativity. Capricorn. I mean, in a way, it's rather like yesterday. There's not a huge amount of change that's been taking place over the last 24 hours. You've still got all those planets in Capricorn. You've still got the Chiron squares. So, yesterday I talked about Sun square Chiron, Sun in Capricorn square Chiron in Aries. And, today the Sun is still square Chiron, but the most exact aspect involving Chiron is Mars. So Mars is square Chiron. And so whatever was happening yesterday, I think today is to an extent a continuation, but there may be a slight change of emphasis. So with Mars, Mars is in Capricorn, right now, and Mars will stay in Capricorn, for a bit longer. And Mars is, it's a great place for Mars to be exalted in Capricorn, and it should, I hope, be giving you a lot of power, and you can certainly look after yourself. You can look after yourself very well, and you are, I hope, being able to sort of move forward, with whatever your ambitions are, and you can certainly project yourself, very effectively. But Mars square Chiron is maybe a bit of a hiccup. You'd like things to go your way completely, but Chiron is representing maybe a challenge that you have to think about. You perhaps have to think about other things. You can make a huge amount of progress for sure with Mars in Capricorn, but if you make too much progress, you might lose sight of your fundamental priorities, and perhaps Chiron is reminding you of this. You have to think about where you are coming from. What are your roots, and sometimes if you're thinking about your roots, that can be destructive, or it can at least be rebellious. Why would it be rebellious? You can go through your life and never be challenged, and it's all fine. You take certain things for granted. You take where you come from for granted. But all of a sudden, you might be in a situation where your loyalties are questioned. Who do you belong to? Do you belong to this place or that place? And when your loyalties are being questioned, and loyalties which perhaps relate to the distant past, when those loyalties are being questioned, then you might dig down. You might dig deep or dig in, and so that might be what you're experiencing. You perhaps feel that fundamentally you have to protect who you are, and you have to protect your past. And when you feel it's important to protect your past, you might just come over as being quite rebellious, because you're so stubborn. And the question is, why are you being so stubborn? Why is anyone being so stubborn? The reason someone is being so stubborn is because it's a matter of existential importance. We are our past. If we lose our past, we arguably lose everything. And so, Capricorn, do think very hard about where you have come from. And it's not something that can be compromised, and it may actually be underpinning a lot of your actions, particularly those actions which might seem assertive or even aggressive, because you are protecting something, and that is something you can do. And being protective is what perhaps often what rebellion is all about. When you get anyone who finds that their fundamental beliefs are being challenged, they have no choice. They have to rise up, and in the process, change is required, or change may be necessary, and this might be reflected by some of the people around you. And people could turn up from nowhere. You hadn't seen them before, or you hadn't seen them for a very long time. Or alternatively, certain relationships may undergo an unexpected change. You had taken everything for granted, or perhaps they had taken everything for granted, and then suddenly someone takes a stand. Yeah, it could be that it's you taking the stand. Now, I know all of that sounds rather heavy and perhaps rather abstract, but in a fundamental way, I mean, I don't think that today is necessarily going to be too bad. I mean, there's no doubt you're in a strong position. Absolutely no doubt at all. I mean, with those 4 planets in Capricorn, and furthermore, the moon is making a sextiles to those planets. You've got moon sextile Mars, moon sextile Sun, moon sextile Venus, and the moon is trine Saturn. So those lunar aspects are completely benign, and it does indicate that you can conduct yourself very well. You can be forceful, for sure. But in many cases, you don't have to be forceful. You just make it very clear who you are. That's important, existentially. You make it clear who you are and where you've come from. You don't compromise that. And with that kind of approach, it may be that things are very easy. You are accepted, and it's more than accepted. Your initiatives are accepted. So if you want something to happen, Capricorn, then just be clear about it. Give the impression that it's not a point of argument. And if you are able to do that, then I think that most things should go your way. So I think, Capricorn, it's quite an intense Tuesday, but I do think it's a Tuesday when you can really make an impression, and you can hold firm in terms of the things that you really believe in. Aquarius. Moon continues to move through Scorpio, and so while the moon moves through Scorpio, you're feeling quite capable. You're feeling that you're in a position where you're able to make an impact. I mean, in a low-profile kind of way. I mean, you don't really want to draw attention to yourself, but at the same time, there are things you want to do. There are things you want to accomplish, and with the moon in Scorpio making sextiles to all those planets in Capricorn, because a load of planets in Capricorn, 4 planets in Capricorn, it's quite easy to make an impression. And you're not going to lose touch with the things that are fundamentally important to you, especially as the moon is making a trine to Saturn. I mean, that trine to Saturn, is quite gentle, but it's certainly useful. And it means that Aquarius, with relative ease, you can get your way, and you can get your way perhaps, in terms of money. I mean, if there's something of a financial nature that is unresolved, or you want it to be resolved, particularly if it relates to your work or your career or business, there are definitely ways to sort it out, and to make sure that your opinions hold firm, that people listen to you, but also, people respect you. And I think, in general, you can gain respect without necessarily having to do very much. And you just have to keep in mind the things that you want. And as far as the square between Mars and Chiron, I've gone on about this square between Mars and Chiron, and this square does say something about what you're trying to achieve. And Aquarius can be a sign that likes to hold back sometimes. You don't want to always get directly involved with things, and you do, although you have a clear sense of what you want, there's just a broader issue about how you're able to communicate what you want. And perhaps that's what this Mars square Chiron is about. A feeling perhaps that, you know, in the past you might have been ignored. People didn't really appreciate that you had your own desires, your own aims, that you have an ego. We all have egos, and your ego needs to be developed in a particular direction. And yeah, you felt that was being discounted. And Mars square Chiron might mean that wound, if it is a wound, is close to the surface. But it also means that there is definitely a way of resolving it. And I said earlier in this piece on Aquarius that you can make an impression. You can make an impression, and you can make it clear what you want without making a big fuss. You don't have to draw huge amounts of attention to yourself. And with this Mars square Chiron, part of it is just saying to yourself that you're going to be very, very clear about what you want, about what you want to achieve. You're not going to hold back, but you're not necessarily going to make a fuss. You're only going to raise your voice if you have to. And if you are clear, you're clear to yourself, you're clear in terms of how you communicate. Again, you don't have to make a big fuss. Maybe you don't have to say anything. You can sometimes communicate through your body and through your decisiveness. So if you can do that, then you'll be setting yourself up nicely, very well. And as I constantly remind you, if you're feeling a bit down, that we're about to enter Aquarius season, and Aquarius season is a good way of following through from Mars square Chiron. Mars square Chiron is that realization that you can't compromise yourself. You can't compromise, the things that you want, the things that are important to you. And I think that Mars square Chiron might be an understated rebellion, but it's a rebellion which starts with yourself, and perhaps that's where the real hurdles are. You've perhaps just been a little too reserved, but it does seem that you're now able to sort of get over this issue, and you can look forward to a time where things are more dynamic, and where you will be respected, and you have the opportunity to get whatever it is that you are aiming for. Pisces. Things are looking pretty good, I would have said. Yesterday needn't have been a bad day. I don't think today's a bad day. I think that there is a fair amount going on. Jupiter, your ruler, is still making an opposition to Mercury and Venus, and it's not any opposition. It's not just any opposition. It's on the Mercury-Venus midpoint, and as I think I said yesterday, Jupiter's position in Cancer, it's exalted in Cancer, opposition Mercury-Venus, the Mercury-Venus midpoint. As I said, it is about you being able to do things that feel incredibly satisfactory. They feel good. You feel good about yourself. You feel. It's more than satisfactory. It's more than just satisfaction. It's about you knowing that you have the opportunity to just do everything that you want to do in a creative sense. It's really very, very creative, having Jupiter in Cancer on a Mercury-Venus midpoint, and so there is absolutely no reason at all to hold back, and you can really harness your energy, and probably harness other people's energy as well, if necessary. You can make it clear that this is who you are, and this is what you want. And this is going to be even more intense when the moon moves into Sagittarius. So if you're in the Americas, late in the day, late afternoon, early evening, moon moves into Sagittarius, so that gives you a real boost, and you have a sense of what can be achieved. Perhaps while the moon is in Scorpio, you've been thinking about possibilities, but when the moon moves into Sagittarius, that gives you the energy you need. You just sometimes, Pisces, you do need a bit of fire, and so moon moving into Sagittarius at the end of the day, or tomorrow if you're not in the Americas, that just gives you the spark that really is required. And aside from that, we've got moon making a trine to Saturn. So moon trine Saturn, that's a great aspect. It allows you to think about what is what is possible, and you're becoming aware of all these different possibilities. And now it's perhaps time for you to make a choice. And maybe when the moon moves into Sagittarius, you can have this moment where everything just becomes clear, and you'll know what you have to do next. Of course, there is this Mars square Chiron. I can't avoid mentioning this Mars square Chiron. I'm not saying that this Mars square Chiron has a huge impact upon you. I mean, at least in a relative sense, but it is something that I am talking about. And Mars square Chiron might, for you, be quite a material aspect. Chiron has been moving through Aries for some time. I mean, quite soon Chiron will be moving into Taurus, but it's still in Aries. And so while Chiron has been in Aries, it's possible there had been moments when you felt hard done by, maybe financially. Maybe you felt that something was denied to you, something was owed to you, but you weren't given it, and that might be annoying. But then Mars is making a square to Chiron, and so Mars is a planet that does have a relationship to Pisces. Mars rules the water signs. And so there is a sympathy, certainly, between Mars and Pisces. And so you might say that Mars, to an extent, is your ruler. Of course, I know Mars is not your ruler. I know that obviously Jupiter is your ruler. But Jupiter is square Chiron. We have got Mars opposition Jupiter with Chiron on the T. So Chiron is square Mars, Chiron is square Jupiter. So I do think that there is a Mars-Jupiter relationship here. And so maybe with Mars square Chiron, you have an opportunity to take a stand. So if you feel that Pisces, that you've been hard done by, in a financial sense, this Mars square Chiron may allow you to raise the volume, to make it clear that this is not good enough. And you have to be careful how you do it, and you've got to approach things in a subtle way. But then you're a Pisces, that's something you're very good at. So if you feel that something of a material nature has been denied to you, then maybe with Mars square Chiron you can actually do something about it. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now it's time to move to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Tuesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 14, which is possession in great measure. So, this hexagram is perhaps much prized. It's a hexagram which talks about gain, perhaps monetary gain. So, we have a lot we can gain a lot, and so it might appeal to our natural greed, maybe my natural greed, maybe not your natural greed. Some people, have different priorities, and of course, possession can take many forms. Possession is not just about money; it can be about what we have in terms of our worth, in terms of our wisdom, our knowledge, our friends, our families. All of this is what possession is about, and that is certainly a very good hexagram to start off with, and that may say something about today, Tuesday, that we should be very aware of what we have, but things are not necessarily that simple. We do have 3 moving lines, so with 3 moving lines, that's higher than average, and so that might indicate that over the course of today, Tuesday, there are quite a lot of things going on. Things are unfolding. One thing's changing, something else takes its place, and so we have to be aware of that flux. And the bottom line moves, and so the bottom line moving, that is the beginning of the process. Maybe that says something about the beginning of the day, but it means that if we're at the beginning of a process, perhaps we've got ideas about what we can gain over the course of the day, we have to be careful. We shouldn't take on too much, and particularly we have to be aware of what could go wrong. We might be able to achieve a huge amount, but that doesn't mean to say we will, and there are going to naturally be some pitfalls, and we have to have the right relationship to, for example, people who have a lot. Might be the wealthy. It's all relative, isn't it? There are always going to be people who have more money than us, and so we have to have the right relationship to wealth and to power, and to realize that to begin with, we don't have all the cards. We don't really have any cards at all. So we have to be aware of our own vulnerability, and then we have the 4th line moving, and again, caution is certainly required. And in terms of money, the fourth line is really indicating that we absolutely mustn't show off. We might have a lot. We might have not just a lot of money. I'm sure. Okay. I don't have a lot of money, or maybe you've got a lot of money. It's all relative, isn't it? There's always someone who's poorer than us, always someone who's richer than us. But we have to make sure that we don't show off whatever we have. Anyone who has a cell phone, you don't walk down the street holding your cell phone. Apparently that's a particularly dangerous thing to do in London, for example, because it might get stolen, probably other places as well. But ostentatiousness is not welcome. And that applies not just to money, it's also knowledge. And, there may be opportunities to show off what we know, but we shouldn't necessarily take advantage of those opportunities. Unless it's important, unless we really have to make a point. But we should really err on the side of modesty today, certainly in terms of that 4th line. Then the 6th line moves, and the 6th line seems to be an entirely fortunate line. It seems that we kind of make sense of it all, and we get a perspective on our own possessions, and perhaps because we realize that certainly material wealth is just transitory, we have a sort of a relaxed approach to it in the end. It may be difficult to gain that relaxed approach, but when we do have that relaxed approach, things do start to come together, and in the process we can maybe create change. It's possible that that something or someone has to be confronted. And maybe in the end, we perhaps have to show off what we have. And I'm thinking particularly in terms of knowledge. I'm not really talking about money. It's more sort of knowledge, even power. We perhaps have to show off what we have in order to gain an advantage over someone who needs to be put in their place. And we're doing this not out of ego, not because we want power, but because it is the right thing to do. And then because we've got 3 moving lines, that means we move to a second hexagram. And the second hexagram we move to is hexagram 46, pushing upward. Pretty good hexagram. It means that after all the drama of possession in great measure, we can make good progress. It's not necessarily the case that we're going to reach our goal, but we're certainly moving forward. And we can be very happy with whatever it is that we're able to achieve by the end of the day. And now I want to look at Mars square Chiron. So let's start off by looking at this aspect and perhaps considering why it bothers me. Why does it bother me right now? And so here's the chart of the exact square between Mars and Chiron. I believe this aspect takes place late today at 10:33 p.m. London time. So if you're in Australia or New Zealand or Asia or Russia, for example, then Mars square Chiron will actually happen tomorrow on the 14th. And if you're in the Americas, then this afternoon, then it will be this afternoon. So Mars is here. Mars is at 22 degrees 40 Capricorn, and Mars is at 22 degrees 40 Aries. I'm sorry to be subjective here, but this Mars square Chiron does have an impact on me. So just as as a reminder about my chart, here is my chart, and I have my moon at 22 degrees 23 Aries. So that means that I've got Chiron conjunct my moon. I mean, that in itself wouldn't worry me too much, but the fact that I've got Mars and Chiron hitting my moon, so I've got Mars in Capricorn square my moon today, and I've got Chiron making the conjunction to my moon, it does make me slightly nervous. Even just Mars square my moon could mess me up in perhaps ways I haven't yet thought of. So maybe what I'm trying to do here is honor the aspect. So I do have this idea in astrology that a transit can manifest in many different ways, and so perhaps I have a choice. Perhaps talking about Mars square Chiron is a way of manifesting the fact that Chiron is conjunct my moon. So that might be one of my motivations. Now, as far as this Mars square Chiron is concerned, and what it might mean, I think that this Mars square Chiron is quite integral to what Chiron actually is. And I just want to remind you of the chart of the discovery of Chiron. So here's a discovery chart which we looked at yesterday. But the thing is that when Chiron was discovered, Mars was square Chiron. So as far as I'm concerned, the discovery chart tells us something about the nature of Chiron. And the fact that Mars was exactly square Chiron when it was discovered on the 1st of November 1977 indicates to me that Chiron is a far more aggressive energy than some people make it out to be. Wounded healer. Yeah, maybe it is a wounded healer. I mean, but I think you can take the mythology perhaps too far. You can perhaps get trapped by the mythology, and there are other ways of trying to discern what a planet means. And so I think that there is definitely an aggression to Mars square Chiron. And another thing about the Chiron discovery chart is that was the only body in Earth signs. There were no planets in Earth on November the 1st, 1977, except for Chiron in Taurus. And so there might be a sort of a materialism to Chiron that perhaps we don't normally think about, that it doesn't necessarily occur to us. But still, as Mars was square Chiron at the time of Chiron's discovery, I think that the current Mars square Chiron is particularly poignant, and we perhaps should be focusing on the aggressive energy of Chiron. And again, that's not something we normally think about, but the heading of this video, I talked about the anger of Chiron. And yeah, I think that Chiron is an angry energy. And this anger, if you kind of link it with the healing and compassion, then it might be about the anger about what is happening in the world. Perhaps being angry about other people's suffering, wherever that suffering is taking place. And I'm not giving out any sort of political opinions here, but if you think about all the places that could make you angry or could make some people angry, you could be angry about what's happening in Iran. You could be angry on many different levels about what's happening in Iran. It depends on your perspective. I mean, you can look at Iran in two different ways. I mean, you can look at Iran as being these brave people on the streets fighting a tyrannical regime. You can also look at what's going on in Iran as Western intervention stirring things up. You could say the same about Venezuela. You could get angry about this shooting in Minnesota. You could get angry about it. With Mars, it's interesting. We've had Mars square Chiron and people sort of protesting, all over America about it. Now, I don't know what happened. I'm not giving an opinion here, but it is true that a woman in her car was shot by an ICE agent. I'm not giving a view on the matter here, but there is a source of anger there, and there may be things going on in one's community, in one's society, where you see people being treated incredibly unfairly. I mean, for example, where I am, there was a man who was he was of Iranian ethnicity. He was a dentist. He is a dentist. He serves his community. He had a house on the lake, and the city basically confiscated his house and knocked it down because they wanted to. I think they want to put a parking lot there for boat trailers, and they come up with some reason why it wasn't his house and boundary lines, but it seems to me that, as far as I'm concerned, that his house was taken from him. And so, that's Mars square Chiron. That's an example of things happening in your community that might make you angry. And so that is perhaps the challenge of Mars square Chiron. And the challenge is, perhaps to take a risk, because if you think about the wound, the implied wound, where is the wound? Well, the wound comes about perhaps because if you make a fuss, bad things might happen. Now, at worst, might mean you die. If you're on the streets of Tehran, if you feel you are protesting, even if what's going on in Iran doesn't impact you directly, if you are in Iran, you might have an obligation to make a fuss, but that might lead to your death. That's possible. So that would be Mars square Chiron. By taking action, by acting on the basis of your anger, yeah, you might be damaged. And it's like what I was saying earlier in this video about why people are so silent in this community in the face of injustice. You know, for example, environmental injustice, or the man losing his house. You know, there's people. Some people do make a fuss, but if you actually look at how people behave, people are afraid here. People are really afraid of making a public comment, writing a letter under their name to the city. You know, they'll cheer you on. Good job you're doing, but they're not going to put themselves in the firing line. And that might be the challenge of Mars square Chiron, because there's that fear, there is that wound that that happens if you take a stand. It's like people in this city, their wound is that they might be afraid that the city will come out to get them. If they ask for planning permission to put up a garage, for example, the city might, oh, you complained about us 2 years ago. We're gonna. You can't have that. Also, you've got people. A lot of people have jobs and work connected with municipalities and the city, so they're afraid that they might lose work or something. You know, so there is a lot of fear around, and of course, Mars square Chiron would not care about that. So there is going to be, you know, a degree of bravery with Mars square Chiron, and I think that this is just intrinsic to what this aspect is about. But you know, we shouldn't forget that, you know, Mars square Chiron, you know, might have a sort of a maverick element to it, just not being afraid of causing a fuss. I mean, it possibly can have an obnoxious side to it. Someone who is strongly influenced by Mars square Chiron might just enjoy causing trouble for the sake of it, just saying something outrageous and just seeing where it goes, you know, tossing a grenade in and saying something which might be true, but which nonetheless could be very, very disruptive. And, you know, this might say something about today and, you know, how people are behaving. And so, you know, this is Mars square Chiron in a theoretical sense, and I just wanted to finish by looking at a few Mars square Chiron charts. I've already looked at one Mars square Chiron chart, and that was the discovery of Chiron itself, Mars square Chiron, and that is the defining chart. That defines what Chiron is about. Chiron is about anger, and it is about the challenge of showing your anger and showing your discontent, because there is that implied wound there that you might get hurt, or you might be afraid of getting hurt. Now, one event which took place when Mars was square Chiron is the end of the First World War. This is the armistice, November the 11th, 1918, 11 a.m., and this is where the guns silenced. And at that time, Mars was square Chiron. I think this is the right time. I've set it for London. I know it's 11 a.m., but I think it was 11 a.m. London time as in West European time, but it's kind of interesting that Mars was in Capricorn. The moment Mars moved into the sign of its exaltation, you'd think Mars moving into its exaltation would cause Mars to sort of intensify, but no, Mars moving into an exalted sign, it had just made the square to Chiron. That was when the guns silenced. It was the end of the First World War, at least on the Western Front. And so Mars square Chiron could be, in this case, Chiron represents the ending of something. Is that perhaps the healing of wounds? Of course, the wounds weren't healed very well, because it was only a couple of decades later that the war started all over again. But Mars square Chiron can just in general be about violence and people's response to violence. And in the case of the armistice, that was about the end of violence. Another event that took place, a very different event, which took place with Mars square Chiron. I don't know how this is relevant, whether it's relevant. It may just be coincidence. But beginning of 2024, you had the first execution with nitrogen gas. So this is where someone was... they I think he had a mask and just nitrogen gas was pumped in, and it killed them. It was not a very pleasant way of going, and Mars was square Chiron. Notice at the time of the execution, Chiron was in the 8th house, and Mars was on the cusp of the 5th. But so Mars square Chiron on the 8th says something about the death. I mean, clearly he died because part of the Chiron myth is that you've got a wound but you can't die. Does that say it took him longer than expected to die? But it was certainly a violent act. I don't think that necessarily the symbolism is particularly relates to how one would expect a death by nitrogen with nitrogen gas, but I just thought I'd point it out. Now, Mars square Chiron can be the maverick, tossing the grenade in. And so at the beginning of last year, we had J.D. Vance went to Munich and he gave his speech at the European Security Council, and he was incredibly critical of Europe and the way Europe was taking away people's liberties, for example, cancelling elections and so forth. And this is a chart for when J.D. Vance started making his speech, and you can see that Mars is rising in Cancer, and it was moving towards a square with Chiron. So I would have said J.D. Vance's speech was really, very Mars square Chiron. I mean, he was out to cause trouble. He took a risk, perhaps, but that may be Mars square Chiron. Mars square Chiron is the maverick. Mars is an aggressive energy, and being aggressive, perhaps in a way that to some people might seem appropriate, it causes a lot of fuss, but Chiron likes to do that. So I think that is actually a very good description of Mars square Chiron at work. And then there was we talked about armistices and wars. The inauguration of Vladimir Zelensky as president of Ukraine on May the 20th, 2019. So this happened with Mars at 2 degrees Cancer, Chiron at 4 degrees Cancer. So this is the inauguration of a president that led his country into a war which killed hundreds of thousands of his countrymen. And so Mars is square Chiron. Now, at the time when Zelensky was elected president, he was perhaps seen as something as a maverick. He was seen as just a comedian, and he was president, and he'd made promises, and he'd, perhaps made promises, I think part of his promises, sort things out with Russia to end that sort of conflict, which had been brewing since 2014. But that Mars square Chiron was particularly important because Zelensky himself has Mars square Chiron in his chart. So here is here's Vladimir Zelensky's chart, born on January the 25th, 1978. So he has Mars at 0 degrees Leo, and Chiron at 1 degree Taurus. So Zelensky has Mars square Chiron in his chart, and of course he was born just a couple of months after Chiron was discovered. Chiron was discovered in January the 1st, 1977, and so with Mars square Chiron, again, as a comedian, that might have said something about him as the maverick. Obviously, people in Ukraine appreciated his humour. We saw we saw how I think Barry Humphries had Sun square Chiron. So having a square to Chiron, there might be something comedic about it. But this is Mars rather than the Sun. But it's just interesting how that Mars square Chiron, resonated with his inauguration as president. And so perhaps today with Mars square Chiron, that might again resonate with Zelensky. So that's Mars square Chiron. I mean, I've done my bit. I've said I think quite a lot on the subject of Chiron. I hope you have found my insights. If my insights, I don't know whether my insights are worth anything, but I hope you found my insights of some use. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.